I went on a boat trip with my husband, then blacked out. When I awoke, I was alone on a remote island. I saw my husband sailing away, waving and yelling, "Goodbye, loser! You'll never see me again!" I survived alone for a year. One day, I spotted a ship, and in that moment I knew the revenge I had planned would be both sweet and devastating. It turned out that the champagne tasted bitter, a metallic tang that should have been my first warning. Looking back, I should have seen the glint of something sinister in Grant's eyes as he kept refilling my glass, insisting on just one more during our anniversary cruise. But I was too lost in the romantic haze of it all, the Caribbean sunset bleeding across the water, the gentle sway of our rented yacht, the intoxicating promise of a week unplugged from the world. Around our third glass, my head grew heavy. The world began to tilt, not with the rhythm of the waves, but something far more unsettling. I remember reaching for the polished railing, my fingers slipping. Grant's face swam into view, his expression utterly unreadable, a blank canvas where usually I found warmth. Then, the darkness claimed me. I woke to the abrasive grit of sand in my mouth and the mocking screech of gulls overhead. My skull throbbed as if hammered, each pulse a fresh wave of agony. Blinking against the merciless glare of the sun, I pushed myself up, my arms shaky and weak. Towering palm trees swayed above, while behind me, dense jungle vegetation stretched, almost impenetrable. The beach itself was a crescent, vanishing into rocky outcrops on either side. Then a sound. The distant thrum of an engine. I stumbled to my feet, my gaze sweeping the horizon. Our yacht, a speck of white against the vast blue, was perhaps 200 yards offshore, steadily pulling away. And there, on its deck, stood Grant, my husband of 3 years, waving. His voice, carried by the wind, reached me, clear and chillingly devoid of emotion. "Goodbye, loser! You'll never see me again!" I screamed his name until my throat tore raw. I plunged into the surf, the water tangling my dress around my legs, pulling me back as if the ocean itself conspired against me. But the yacht kept going, shrinking into a distant white dot until it vanished, taking with it every last shred of my former life. That first night was a descent into pure terror. No supplies, no shelter, not a drop of fresh water. I curled beneath a cluster of palms, shivering despite the oppressive tropical heat, my mind a whirlpool of disbelief. Grant had drugged me. Grant had abandoned me on this godforsaken island. Grant had planned this. Why? The question circled relentlessly, a predator in my mind. We'd had our share of marital struggles, of course, what couple didn't? But nothing, absolutely nothing, justified this cold, calculated act, this absolute void where his humanity should have been. Nothing explained the chilling detachment in his eyes as he waved me goodbye. The next morning, driven by a primal need to understand my prison, I explored. The island was small, perhaps 2 miles across at its widest. Rugged cliffs guarded its western edge, while its heart was thick, almost impenetrable jungle. Yet I found a fresh water stream carving its way through the center. A small mercy, a lifeline against dehydration. By day 3, my hands, once accustomed to designer clothes and soft keyboards, had fashioned a crude shelter from palm fronds and driftwood. My sundress, a relic of a life already lost, was now torn and stained beyond recognition. I'd discovered how to crack coconuts against jagged rocks. I'd also realized Grant had taken everything, my phone, my wallet, every last identifier, leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the heavy weight of my wedding ring. On day 4, I hurled that symbol of betrayal into the churning ocean, watching it sink, a final goodbye to the illusion I'd cherished. The weeks that followed blurred into an endless cycle of struggle and adaptation. I learned to spear fish with a sharpened branch, to discern edible berries from poisonous ones, often through violent trial and error. I mastered the art of friction fire, a feat that cost me countless attempts and left my hands a canvas of blisters. More profoundly, I learned that loneliness could be its own kind of death, a silent, insidious erosion of the soul. At night, lying in my makeshift shelter, my thoughts inevitably turned to Grant. Not the charming financial analyst who had swept me off my feet at that art gallery opening, but the real Grant, the monster I'd apparently never known. I began to piece together the mosaic of clues I'd blissfully ignored. His insistence that I quit my marketing director job after we married, masked as a desire for more shared time, was actually about making me dependent. His subtle, then overt isolation of me from my friends, always with a plausible excuse. His gradual takeover of our finances, everything meticulously placed solely in his name. And then, the chilling memory, the $2 million life insurance policy he'd taken out on me just 6 months prior. At the time, I'd dismissed it as responsible planning. Now I understood it for what it truly was, a down payment on my murder. He'd left me here to die, counting on the island's remoteness and the ocean's vastness to swallow my existence. He'd return home, wait a respectable period, report me missing, play the devastated husband, collect his blood money, and move on. The rage that ignited within me during those first months was a raw, burning fuel. I survived purely out of spite, a grim determination not to grant him the satisfaction of my demise. Around the 3-month mark, I realized spite alone wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan. And so, I began to think like Grant, calculating, methodical, always 3 steps ahead. First, I needed to stay alive long enough for rescue. This meant securing more reliable food sources and fortifying my shelter. I wove stronger walls from palm fronds and vines, dug channels to collect rainwater, and built a smoking rack to preserve fish. I meticulously mapped every inch of the island, memorizing its resources and its hidden dangers. Second, I needed to prepare for my eventual return. That meant staying physically strong. I developed a rigorous routine, swimming in the lagoon, scaling the rocky cliffs, running along the beaches. My body, once soft and pampered, transformed into something lean and hard, a vessel of pure sinew and muscle. My hands, once manicured, became calloused and capable, badges of my new reality. Third, and perhaps most consuming, I needed to plan my revenge. This became my constant companion during the long, empty hours. How to destroy Grant as completely as he had tried to destroy me? I knew a simple attempted murder charge wouldn't stick. He'd covered his tracks too well. We'd rented the yacht privately, paid in cash, told no one our destination. He'd undoubtedly reported me as having fallen overboard accidentally, perhaps even fabricated evidence, a stray shoe, a smear of my blood on the deck. No, I needed something more devastating. I needed to dismantle his entire life, piece by agonizing piece, just as he had dismantled mine. The answer, a flicker of light in the profound darkness, came in my 6th month. I was watching the sunset from the beach when a forgotten memory surfaced. Trevor Winters, Grant's business partner, had been at our wedding. Drunk, he'd cornered me by the cake, grumbling about Grant cutting him out of deals, hiding revenue from their joint ventures. At the time, I'd dismissed it as drunken wedding drama. But what if there was more to it? What if Grant's business dealings weren't as clean as he claimed? My memory had always been sharp, a trait Grant had both admired and, I now realized, resented. I began sifting through every conversation, every document I'd ever glimpsed in his home office. I painstakingly reconstructed figures, dates, names. I remembered file folders with cryptic account numbers, hushed phone calls Grant had taken, believing I couldn't hear him from the next room. Slowly, a chilling picture emerged. Grant wasn't just a financial analyst. He was orchestrating an elaborate investment scam, siphoning client money through offshore accounts. Trevor had been an unwitting accomplice, now being systematically pushed out. This was why Grant needed the insurance money. He was either fleeing the law or running from people he'd stolen from. Perhaps both. This, I realized with a jolt, was my leverage. This was how I would destroy him. But first, I had to survive long enough to use it. The 7th month brought a violent storm that nearly claimed my life. The wind tore my shelter to shreds, waves surged halfway up the beach. I huddled in a cave, a new discovery in the rocky cliffs, listening to the howling tempest, wondering if this was how my story would end. When the storm finally passed, half my precious supplies were gone. I had to start over, rebuilding a stronger shelter further inland, creating better storage for my dwindling food and water. It set me back weeks. The 8th month brought fever. Something I ate, or something that bit me, I never knew which. Days blurred into a delirious haze, my body shaking, barely able to drag myself to the stream for water. I came closer to dying then than I care to remember. But spite, I discovered, is a powerful medicine. I survived. By the 9th month, I'd achieved a fragile equilibrium with the island. I knew its rhythms, its moods, its dangers. I could predict approaching storms by watching the flight patterns of seabirds. I could find food even during scarce periods. I had constructed a signal fire, carefully maintained for the moment a ship might appear, though none ever did. I also started talking to myself, a habit I knew wasn't a good sign. But the crushing silence was unbearable, and hearing a human voice, even my own, helped tether me to sanity. I'd narrate my daily tasks, discuss my elaborate revenge plans with imaginary audiences, even argue with phantom versions of Grant. "You thought I was weak, didn't you?" I'd snarl, sharpening my fishing spear. "You thought I'd just curl up and die out here." The 10th month brought a moment of despair so profound, so soul-crushing, I almost walked into the ocean and kept going. It was our actual wedding anniversary, not the fabricated one Grant had chosen for the cruise. I'd been on this island almost as long as we'd been married. Everything we'd built, every memory, every promise, felt like a lie. Now I was alone on this godforsaken rock, with nothing but coconuts, fish, and my own tortured thoughts. But I didn't walk into the ocean. Instead, I climbed to the highest point on the island and screamed until my voice gave out. Then, I climbed back down and kept surviving. The 11th month brought an unexpected gift. A sealed plastic container, the kind used for emergency supplies, washed ashore. Inside, a working flare gun with 3 precious flares, a waterproof blanket, and a basic first aid kit. To me, it was nothing short of a miracle. I guarded those flares like they were made of gold, vowing not to waste them unless a ship was undoubtedly close enough to see. By the end of that 11th month, I barely recognized myself. My hair, long and tangled, was bleached by the relentless sun. My skin was dark, weathered, and etched with the lines of hardship. My body, once soft, was now pure muscle and sinew. I'd lost at least 45 pounds. The feral, wild creature staring back at me from the stream's surface was both alien and intensely familiar. But my mind was sharper than it had ever been. All those hours of solitude had honed my thoughts to a razor's edge. I meticulously planned every detail of my revenge, playing it out 1,000 times, anticipating every variable, every possible outcome. During those final weeks before my rescue, I spent hours each day in mental exercises, keeping my mind keen. I'd recite everything I knew about Grant's business dealings, testing my memory against itself. The account numbers had to be perfect. The dates exact. One mistake could unravel everything. I remembered the night I'd accidentally walked in on Grant's video call, a call he'd quickly blocked from the camera, furious that I'd seen anything. He'd accused me of spying, of interfering with his work. I'd profusely apologized, convinced I'd done something terrible. Now I understood, he'd been terrified I'd seen or heard something incriminating. That video call had been on March 15th, 2 years ago. The person on the other end had said something about a Singapore transfer, just before Grant muted them. Singapore. I turned that word over in my mind like a smooth, dangerous stone. What did Grant have in Singapore? Another incident surfaced. Our honeymoon in Bali. Grant had spent an entire afternoon locked in our hotel room, glued to his laptop, while I waited by the pool. When he finally emerged, he'd been relaxed, almost giddy. He'd ordered expensive champagne and declared, "We can afford anything you want now. A big deal just closed." Our honeymoon had been in June, 18 months ago. What kind of deal closes during a honeymoon? What kind of person prioritizes work over their new spouse unless that work is something so clandestine, so illicit, that they can't trust anyone else to handle it? These fragments of memory, once isolated, now formed a terrifying web, each strand connecting to others. I could see the pattern now, clear as day. Grant had been meticulously building his scheme for years, likely long before he ever met me. Marrying me, I realized with a fresh wave of nausea, had been part of the plan too. A facade. A way to project stability and trustworthiness to unsuspecting investors. The devoted husband with a pretty wife made for good optics when you were convincing people to hand over their life savings. I thought about the dinner parties we'd hosted. Grant always invited the same types, older couples, recently retired, sitting on substantial nest eggs. He'd charm them with talk of market trends and infallible investment opportunities. I'd play the perfect hostess, serving canapes and making small talk, utterly oblivious that I was merely a prop in his con, an unwitting accomplice in planting the seeds of fraudulent schemes. The realization made me want to scream, to lash out at the injustice. Instead, I channeled that burning rage into my survival and my planning. Every fish I caught, every fire I built, every sunrise I witnessed became a victory, a defiant middle finger to Grant's intentions. He meant for me to die here, terrified and alone. Instead, I was thriving in ways he never anticipated. The island had taught me things I'd never have learned in my old life. I understood now how little I actually needed, how much of my previous existence had been artificial padding around an empty core. The designer clothes, the expensive dinners, the carefully curated social media presence, all of it had been a costume I wore to play the role Grant had assigned me. Out here, stripped of everything, I'd found something real. A strength I didn't know I possessed. A resilience that surprised even me. A kind of clarity that only comes when you're reduced to pure, unadulterated survival. I'd also discovered I was far smarter than Grant had ever given me credit for. He dismissed my intelligence, called my career cute, suggested my contributions were less valuable than his. He'd made me feel small and dependent. But my mind, I now knew, was a formidable weapon, a thing that would ultimately destroy him. Because I'd figured out something else during my months of isolation. Grant wasn't just running a Ponzi scheme or simple embezzlement. He was laundering money for someone else. That Singapore connection, the hushed phone calls, the offshore accounts across multiple countries, it all pointed to something far bigger than a lone financial analyst stealing from his clients. Grant was a middleman. And if I could prove that, if I could provide authorities with undeniable evidence of the larger operation, I wouldn't just be bringing down my attempted murderer. I'd be dismantling an entire criminal network. The thought filled me with a fierce, unwavering sense of purpose. My survival wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. Other people were victims of whatever dark web Grant was entangled in. Other families had lost their savings, their futures, their security. By exposing Grant, I'd be helping them, too. I started composing my testimony in my head, rehearsing how I'd explain everything to investigators. I'd need to be credible, coherent, meticulously detailed. I couldn't afford to come across as a traumatized victim making wild accusations. I needed to be precise, professional, unshakable. So I practiced. Standing on the beach, I'd deliver my testimony to imaginary FBI agents. I'd answer their hypothetical questions, anticipate their skepticism, provide additional details to corroborate my claims. I must have looked utterly insane, gesturing at the empty air, conducting full conversations with people who weren't there. But the practice kept my mind engaged, sharp, and prepared me for what was coming. I also spent a lot of time contemplating what I'd do after Grant was behind bars. My old life was gone. I understood that. I couldn't go back to being the person I was before the island. That version of me had died the moment I woke up on that desolate beach. But who would I become instead? The question fascinated me. I had a chance to rebuild myself from scratch, to choose who I wanted to be, rather than simply accepting what others expected of me. Maybe I'd go back to school, study something I'd always been interested in but never pursued. Marine biology, perhaps. I'd certainly learn enough about ocean life to spark a genuine interest. Or environmental science. Or psychology. I'd spend enough time analyzing my own trauma to be curious about the human mind. Maybe I'd write a book about my experience, not for money or fame, but to process what had happened, to transform my nightmare into something that might help someone else survive their own impossible situation. Or perhaps, I mused, I'd disappear entirely, start over somewhere new with a different name and a different life. The thought held a certain appeal, becoming someone Grant could never find, never touch, never influence, even from prison. These daydreams were my companions during my final weeks on the island. They gave me something to look forward to beyond simply revenge. Because revenge, I was learning, was cold comfort. It wouldn't heal me. It wouldn't undo the trauma. It would simply balance the scales. Real healing would come from building something new, from taking the lessons the island had taught me and applying them to whatever came next. I'd learned that I could survive anything. That I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. That I didn't need Grant, or anyone else, to validate my worth. These lessons were the island's true gifts, more valuable than any revenge could ever be. Still, I wanted the revenge. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I wanted Grant to feel a fraction of the fear and desperation I'd felt. I wanted him to understand that you can't just erase people when they become inconvenient. I wanted him to face consequences for once in his privileged, consequence-free life. The wanting didn't make me a bad person. I decided it made me human. And after almost a year of being reduced to pure survival instinct, reclaiming my humanity, even the darker parts of it, felt like an achievement. Then, on day 362 of my exile, I saw the ship. It was mid-morning. I was checking my fishing traps in the lagoon when I noticed a faint shape on the horizon. At first, I dismissed it as a cloud formation, but clouds don't have straight edges. Clouds don't move with such relentless purpose. My heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I scrambled out of the water and sprinted for my shelter, my hands shaking as I retrieved the flare gun. I loaded the first flare, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. Then, I climbed to my signal fire spot, a clearing on a hill with an unobstructed view of the ocean, and waited. The ship was growing closer, but it wasn't heading directly toward the island. It was on a trajectory to pass perhaps 2 miles offshore. I lit my signal fire, which I'd kept meticulously prepared for exactly this moment. Black smoke billowed into the clear sky. Then I fired the flare. The bright red projectile arced into the heavens, leaving a smoky trail against the blue. I loaded the second flare, waited, and fired again. The ship was still coming, but had they seen me? I loaded my last flare. My hands were steadier now. I tracked the ship's movement, calculated the angle, and fired. This time, a profound wave of relief washed over me. I saw the ship alter course. It was turning toward the island. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by a cascade of emotions I couldn't quite name. Relief, yes. Joy, maybe. But underneath it all was something colder, harder. Anticipation. Grant thought I was dead. Grant thought he'd gotten away with it. The revenge I had meticulously planned would be both devastating and impossibly sweet. The ship, a commercial fishing vessel called the Pacific Promise, reached the island 2 hours later. They couldn't get too close due to the shallow waters and rocky outcrops, so they dispatched a small motorboat to shore. 3 men approached cautiously. I must have looked like a madwoman, standing on the beach in my tattered dress, hair wild and bleached, skin burned dark by the sun. "Miss," one of them called, his voice hesitant. "Are you all right?" I opened my mouth and realized I hadn't spoken to another human being in almost a year. My voice came out as a raw, strangled croak. "I need help." They wrapped me in blankets, offered me water, and asked gentle, measured questions. I gave them my name and told them I'd been stranded after a boating accident. I didn't mention Grant yet. That conversation would come later, and not with them. On the ship, the captain, a weathered man named Rodriguez, gave me his cabin and radioed the Coast Guard. He offered me food, but my stomach had shrunk so much I could only manage a few bites. He offered me clothes, and I gratefully changed out of the rags I'd worn for a year. "You're lucky to be alive," Captain Rodriguez said, shaking his head. "That island isn't on any major shipping routes. We only came this way because we were following a tuna school. Lucky, I repeated. The word felt strange, almost foreign in my mouth. The Coast Guard helicopter arrived 6 hours later. They airlifted me to a hospital in Puerto Rico where doctors examined me with a mixture of professional concern and undisguised curiosity. Dehydration, malnutrition, various infections, severe sun damage, but overall, remarkably healthy given the circumstances. You're incredibly resilient, the attending physician told me. Most people wouldn't have survived a month in those conditions. I had a reason to survive, I said, a quiet fire burning in my eyes. They contacted my emergency contact, my sister Bethany, who nearly fainted when she heard my voice on the phone. She'd been told I was dead. There had been a funeral, a memorial service, everything. Grant said you fell overboard, she sobbed. He said they searched for days but couldn't find you. Oh my God, I can't believe you're alive! Is Grant still in Boston? I asked, cutting through her joyous tears. Yes, he's… Wait, you want to see him after everything you've been through? I have some questions for him, I replied, my voice steady. News of my miraculous rescue made headlines across the globe. Woman survives year on deserted island, screamed the papers. Reporters descended upon the hospital, a relentless swarm. The hospital had to post security to keep them away. Everyone wanted to know how I'd survived, what I'd eaten, how I'd maintained my sanity. No one, I noted, was asking the right questions yet. But they would. I was discharged after 3 days, with strict instructions to take it easy and attend follow-up appointments. Bethany flew down to Puerto Rico to bring me home. On the plane, she filled me in on everything that had transpired since my disappearance. Grant had reported me missing the day after the cruise. He claimed we'd been drinking, celebrating our anniversary, and when he woke in the morning, I was simply gone. He'd called the Coast Guard immediately. There had been a massive search operation that lasted 2 weeks before they called it off. My body was never found, but given the currents in that area and the time that had passed, authorities concluded I had drowned. Grant had played the grieving husband perfectly. He'd cried at my funeral. He'd delivered a moving eulogy about our profound love and all the plans we'd had together. He'd even moved out of our house, claiming it was too painful to be there without me, and started a small scholarship fund in my name. Everyone felt so terrible for him, Bethany said, shaking her head. He seemed absolutely destroyed. I bet he did, I murmured, a bitter smile playing on my lips. What Grant hadn't counted on was me coming back from the dead. We landed in Boston late in the evening. Bethany wanted to take me to her house, let me rest, ease back into civilization. But I had other plans. Take me to Grant, I said, my voice firm. Are you sure? Maybe you should wait until, take me to Grant. She drove me to his new apartment in the Seaport District. An expensive area. He must have already cashed in some of that life insurance money. The thought made my blood boil. I told Bethany to wait in the car. This confrontation would be private. The doorman tried to stop me. I still looked pretty rough despite my new clothes and a quick clean-up. But I told him my name, and I watched his face go pale. He stammered something about calling Mr. Ashford, but I was already heading for the elevator. Grant lived on the 15th floor. I knocked on his door, my heart hammering in my chest. This was the moment I'd fantasized about for a year. The moment I'd see his face when he realized his meticulously crafted plan had failed. The door opened. Grant stood there, in expensive loungewear, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking tanned and relaxed. He saw me, and the glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the polished hardwood floor. "Hello, Grant?" I said, my voice a silken blade. "Miss me?" His face cycled through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, raw fear, and finally, a desperate, sickening attempt at joy. "Oh my God, you're alive! I can't believe, how did you? Where have you been?" He lunged forward, reaching for me, but I instinctively stepped back, repulsed. "Don't, sweetheart. I've been going crazy with worry. The Coast Guard said you probably drowned, But I never gave up hope. I stopped lying, I said quietly, cutting him off. I know what you did. His face changed again, the mask slipping. For just a moment, I saw the real Grant. Cold. Calculating. Murderous. Then he recovered, forcing confusion onto his features. What are you talking about? You fell overboard. I looked for you. You drugged me, I stated, my voice unwavering. You dumped me on that island. You left me there to die so you could collect my life insurance. He scoffed, a brittle, dismissive sound. That's insane. You must have hit your head. The trauma. You're not thinking straight. I remember everything, Grant. The champagne tasting bitter. Your face right before I passed out. And when I woke up on that beach, I saw you. I saw you on the yacht, waving goodbye, telling me I'd never see you again. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes narrowed, calculating. Then he laughed, and there was nothing warm or human in the sound. You can't prove any of that. It's your word against mine, and you've been alone on an island for a year. Who's going to believe you're in your right mind? Maybe you're right, I conceded, a chill entering my voice. Maybe I can't prove attempted murder. He relaxed slightly, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. But, I continued, stepping closer, I can prove fraud. I can prove embezzlement. I can prove that you've been running an investment scam for the last 5 years, stealing millions from your clients. I can prove that Trevor Winters has evidence of all of it, that he's been collecting documentation because you were cutting him out. Grant's face went white. How could you possibly? I had a lot of time to think on that island. I interrupted, a cruel smile forming. A lot of time to remember things. I always had an excellent memory, you used to say it yourself, didn't you? Account numbers. Client names. Conversations I overheard. The Cayman account ending in 4721. The Luxembourg account ending in 9382. The Shell Corporation in Delaware called Harbinger Investments. The falsified statements you sent to the Morrison family, the Chin family, the Rodriguez family. Should I go on? He stared at me, his eyes darting, and I could see him frantically calculating, trying to discern if I truly knew what I claimed to know. I did. Every number, every name, every detail, painstakingly reconstructed during my months of solitude. What do you want? He finally choked out. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything, I said, my voice cold and clear. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to the police. I'm going to the FBI. I'm going to the families you stole from. And I'm going to Trevor Winters, who I suspect will be very interested in making a deal to testify against you. They'll arrest you, too. You were my wife. They'll think you were part of it, he spluttered, desperation creeping into his voice. I was never part of your business dealings, Grant. You kept me isolated, remember? You made sure I had no access to your accounts, no knowledge of your work. You made me quit my job. You controlled every aspect of my life. It was another way to control me. But now, it's going to save me. And destroy you. Grant lunged forward, grabbing my arm, his grip surprisingly weak. For a moment, I saw pure, unadulterated violence in his eyes. He was considering killing me right here, right now, consequences be damned. But I'd spent a year learning to survive. My body moved on instinct, twisting his arm, using his momentum to throw him off balance. He stumbled backward, crashing into a side table, sending a lamp clattering. Don't touch me, I said, my voice deadly calm, utterly devoid of fear. I'm not the woman you left on that island. That woman was weak, dependent, controllable. I'm someone else now. I turned and walked toward the door. You'll never make this stick, he shouted after me, his voice trembling with impotent rage. I'll fight you on everything. I'll make your life hell. I looked back at him, this man I'd once loved, this man who tried to murder me. You already did, I said. But I survived. Can you say the same? Over the next few weeks, I watched Grant's life collapse with methodical satisfaction. The FBI opened an investigation based on my detailed testimony, and the information I provided. Trevor Winters, facing his own charges, did exactly what I predicted. He cut a deal, turning over mountains of incriminating evidence against Grant. The life insurance company, undoubtedly thrilled not to pay out $2 million to a potential murderer, hired a team of investigators to prove Grant had attempted to murder me. They found the private yacht owner who remembered Grant acting nervous and insisting on specific departure times. They unearthed Grant's search history on his work computer, revealing extensive research into remote islands and survival rates for castaways. They even found receipts for sleeping pills, purchased under a fake name at a pharmacy 2 towns over from where we lived, bought just a week before our fateful trip. The attempted murder charge, I was told, would stick. Grant's assets were frozen. His former clients sued him into oblivion. His once pristine reputation was utterly demolished. The news coverage was relentless. The man who tried to kill his wife and steal millions, undone by her miraculous survival. I learned from the prosecutors that Grant had been living off credit and borrowed money from dangerous associates, desperately waiting for the insurance payout. The death certificate process was still ongoing when I returned. He'd planned to have me declared legally dead through a maritime court, a process much faster than the typical 7-year waiting period for missing persons. My resurrection had stopped that process cold, leaving him deeply in debt to some very powerful, very dangerous people. As for me, I moved in with Bethany while I figured out my next steps. The world I'd left behind felt utterly alien now. Supermarkets overwhelmed me with their abundance. Sleeping in a soft bed felt strange after a year on the hard ground. I jumped at sudden noises, a constant state of hyper-alertness. I hoarded food, even though I knew I didn't need to. But I was alive. And I was free. And Grant was going to prison for a very long time. Was it worth it? Bethany asked me one evening, her voice gentle. The revenge, I mean. Does it make up for what happened? I considered her question. Nothing could give me back the year I'd lost. Nothing could erase the trauma of nearly dying alone on that island. Nothing could restore my innocence or my ability to trust. But watching Grant lose everything he valued, his freedom, his wealth, his reputation, did provide a certain cold, undeniable satisfaction. It doesn't make up for it, I said finally. But it helps. The trial was scheduled for 6 months away. I'd have to testify, relive everything in front of cameras and journalists, and Grant himself. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I knew I would do it. I'd survived worse. In the meantime, I started therapy, began rebuilding my life, started figuring out who I was now that I was no longer Grant's wife or the woman on the island. It wasn't easy. Some days I felt barely human, like I'd left too much of myself on that beach. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, specialized in trauma survivors. She had kind eyes and never pushed me to talk before I was ready. During our 3rd session, she asked me something no one else had. Do you feel guilty for surviving? The question caught me off guard. Why would I feel guilty? Many trauma survivors do, she explained. You endured something that should have killed you. Part of you might feel like you don't deserve to have made it through. I sat with that for a moment, truly examining my feelings. No, I finally said, meeting her gaze. I don't feel guilty. I feel proud. I did everything right. I fought for every single day I was out there. Dr. Kim smiled. Good. Hold on to that. But there were other emotions I struggled with. Anger, obviously, oceans of it directed at Grant, but also at myself for not seeing the warning signs. A pervasive paranoia that made me check locks multiple times and constantly look over my shoulder. Hypervigilance that left me exhausted by the end of each day. And then there was the strange, complicated grief for my old life. I didn't miss Grant, not even a little. But I missed the version of myself who had believed in love and partnership. I missed the innocence of thinking marriage meant safety. I missed trusting people. That's normal, Dr. Kim assured me. You're mourning the loss of your worldview. It's as legitimate as mourning a person. The relentless media attention didn't help my recovery. Everyone wanted to interview me, to hear the sensational story of the woman who survived a year alone. Publishers offered book deals. Producers wanted to option my life story for movies. Survivors of other traumas reached out, treating me like some kind of inspiration. I turned down most of it. I wasn't ready to commodify my nightmare for public consumption. Maybe someday, but not now. Now, I needed privacy and space to heal. Trevor Winters reached out too, asking to meet. I was hesitant. He'd been part of Grant's schemes, after all. But my attorney, Richard Chin, advised me to hear him out. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Cambridge. Trevor looked older than I remembered, worn down by legal troubles and guilt. He ordered a black coffee, his hands shaking slightly. "I need you to know something," he said without preamble. "I suspected Grant was planning something with you. I didn't know what, but I saw him researching islands and life insurance policies. I told myself it was none of my business." The confession hung heavy between us. "You could have warned me," I said quietly. "I know," he replied, meeting my eyes. "And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I was a coward. I was so focused on covering my own ass, on getting out of the business with Grant before it all collapsed, that I ignored the signs someone might get hurt. I'm sorry." An apology couldn't undo what had happened, but I appreciated the raw honesty. "Your testimony is going to put him away for a long time." "Not long enough," Trevor said bitterly. "But it's something." He slid a folder across the table. "This is everything I have on the Singapore connection. The FBI already has copies, but I thought you should see it, too. You were right. Grant was laundering money for a much larger operation. The people he was working for, they're still out there." A chill ran down my spine. "Are they dangerous?" "Extremely." He nodded. "But you helped the FBI identify them. They're making arrests now. Not just here, but internationally. You didn't just stop Grant. You helped dismantle the whole network." After Trevor left, I sat in that coffee shop for a long time, processing what he'd told me. I'd known intellectually that I was part of something bigger. But hearing it confirmed was different. I'd made a real difference. My survival had meant something beyond personal revenge. The thought gave me a sense of purpose I badly needed. Bethany noticed a change in me after that meeting. "You seem lighter," she observed over dinner that night. "I think I'm starting to understand why all of this happened," I said. "Not that Grant had a good reason. There's no justification for what he did. But I can see how my survival served a larger purpose. Other people are safer now because I made it off that island." Bethany reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're the strongest person I know." I laughed, though my eyes stung with tears. I didn't feel strong out there. Most of the time, I felt terrified and small and completely overwhelmed. "That's what makes it strength," she said, her voice gentle. "Being terrified and doing it anyway." As the weeks passed, I slowly began reclaiming pieces of my life. I reconnected with old friends who had mourned my death. I visited my parents' graves. They died in a car accident when I was in college, and I found myself wishing they could see how strong I'd become. I even started looking at apartments, ready to move out of Bethany's guest room and into my own space. But the nightmares persisted. Almost every night, I dreamt I was back on the island. Sometimes Grant would appear, standing on the beach, laughing at me. Sometimes I'd see ships on the horizon that never came closer. Sometimes I'd wake up screaming, convinced I could taste salt water and feel sand beneath me. "The nightmares may never completely go away," Dr. Kim warned me gently. "Trauma changes the brain. But they should become less frequent and less intense over time." I focused on the things I could control. Physical therapy to address the damage done to my body during my year of survival. Nutritional counseling to help me maintain healthy eating habits after months of scarcity. Meditation and mindfulness practices to manage my anxiety. And I prepared for the trial. Richard Chin met with me weekly, going over my testimony, preparing me for cross-examination, making sure I understood the legal process. Grant's defense attorney would try to paint me as unreliable, traumatized, possibly delusional. We needed to counter that narrative with clear, credible testimony backed by hard evidence. "You're going to do great," Richard assured me after one particularly grueling practice session. "You're one of the most composed witnesses I've ever worked with." "I've had a lot of practice," I said dryly. 3 months after my rescue, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Grant, forwarded through his attorney. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was short. Grant claimed he still loved me, that everything had been a mistake, that he panicked and made terrible decisions. He begged me to drop the charges, to give him another chance, to remember the good times we'd had together. I read it twice, then showed it to Richard. "Classic abuser tactic," he said immediately. "He's trying to manipulate you emotionally because he knows the legal case against him is airtight. You don't have to respond." "I know," I said. "But I want to." Richard advised against it, but I wrote back anyway. My letter was even shorter than Grant's. "You taught me that actions matter more than words. Your actions tried to kill me. My actions are going to make sure you never hurt anyone else again. See you in court." I didn't sign it with love or any pleasantries. I just signed my name and sent it off. That night, for the first time since my rescue, I didn't have nightmares. Maybe taking that final bit of control back had given my subconscious permission to rest. On day 418, after being abandoned, and 56 days after being rescued, I received a call from the prosecutor handling Grant's case. "The FBI found something unexpected during their investigation," he said, his voice grim. "Grant had taken out that life insurance policy on you, yes. But he'd also taken out another policy 6 months earlier, on his previous girlfriend. She died in a suspicious boating accident. Her body was never recovered. We're reopening that investigation." A cold wave washed over me, a realization that solidified my resolve. "Based on the pattern of behavior," the prosecutor continued, "we think he may have done this before. You may not have been his first victim, but because you survived, you'll be his last." I hung up the phone and walked out onto Bethany's balcony. The Boston skyline stretched before me, familiar and foreign at once. Somewhere in this city, Grant sat in a jail cell, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this, still convinced he was smarter than everyone else. He tried to kill me twice over, once on that island, and once by destroying my sense of self, my independence, my power. He'd wanted to reduce me to nothing. Instead, he'd forged me into something harder, something stronger than he could ever imagine. I thought about that woman on the beach a year ago, watching her husband sail away, screaming his name until her voice broke. I thought about the rage that had kept her alive through those early, desperate days. I thought about the revenge she planned during long, lonely nights. The revenge had been devastating, yes, and sweet, certainly. But it turned out that the real victory wasn't destroying Grant. It was discovering that I was strong enough to survive anything, even him.